Cheers and welcome to Irondale Brewing. This video and the beer that I'm going to talk about today have been in the works for a very long time, both because it's a style that I've been wanting to do for quite a while and did a lot of research, got kind of sucked into a bunch of historical sources and whatnot that I'll talk about a little bit, and also just looking at various approaches to doing a recipe. But what we're talking about today is a pre-prohibition lager. And as you might guess from the name, what that is, it's our kind of modern home brewing attempt to recreate the lagers that were common before Prohibition. And specifically, based on my research anyway, it seems like these types of beers really hit the peak of their popularity in around 1870. And then, of course, they were kind of dominant in the beer scene until Prohibition. And, you know, I think most of you, if you're watching this video, probably know what happened with Prohibition to the beer scene in America. Just decimated tons of breweries. There were a very small handful left after Prohibition. And the lagers, that kind of are the macro lagers of today, your Budweisers, Coors, etc. Those became dominant after Prohibition. There's various theories on why that particular thing took hold. I won't go into here, but so anyway, this is trying to go back to a time when, if you look at the kind of historical records and the BJCP style guidelines on this, lagers were more flavorful. Specifically, there were adjunct lagers. I'll talk about that in a second here. And they were bitter, more bitter, it's a better way to say it, and hoppier than the lagers that we know today as kind of the major mainstream lagers. So I'm going to read a little bit because I want to make sure I cover some of what what I took down in my notes. This is an abbreviated version. I'm not going to do a whole TED Talk here, but I will give you a link to. I ended up writing a blog post. It's still a thing. It was fun to do on my website that will cover this in more detail with quotes from one of the historical brewing books that I dug up online, and it was fascinating to read. Just really cool stuff if you're into history at all, and beer history in particular. Just really cool stuff. I had a great time doing this. So the other thing about this beer is this is the first time I have done what I'll call a true lager, and I am not a lager snob at all in terms of how you make lagers. I will also say, I probably said this in previous videos, I'm not a huge lager fan, generally speaking. So I just hadn't really made one before. And by true lager, I mean I fermented it cold at 50 degrees Fahrenheit and slow. It was in the fermenter, I think, probably a total of almost a month between fermentation, ramping up the diacetyl rest, doing the diacetyl rest, ramping back down to the cold crash, doing the cold crash. Then I transferred to a keg, and it's been in the keg as of today almost 4 weeks, which kind of that seems to be what when it'll hit its peak. I've had a couple. I won't spoil with my opinion. I've had a couple of these, but I have to conserve it a little bit because I'm entering this in a competition. I'm going to be canning a bunch of it this weekend, both for that and to send out to folks. So anyway, like I said, I did a ton of research. You can read the blog post, but in terms of the style, just a couple of things I want to highlight here. There's kind of, at least there used to be, I don't know if it's so prevalent now, but there used to be this sense that before Prohibition, we had all malt lagers and all malt beers, and that was the thing. And then after Prohibition, when the big breweries kind of took over, then they started using the adjuncts. And that's just not true. I mean, if you look at some of the commercial examples of this style, and certainly when I was reading some of these historical sources, they absolutely used adjuncts in huge percentages, as high as 30%. I've seen as high as 33% in some of the historical recipes. So using adjuncts was very much a thing, specifically corn and rice. More predominantly in this style, it was corn. Various incarnations of corn. I used flake corn. I saw a reference to grits and all sorts of other stuff. So just like I said, I kind of geeked out on reading about the history of this. And then I do want to talk about grains just a little bit because historically for this style, probably 6-row is the appropriate thing to use here. I ended up using 100% 6-row. I've seen people use 50-50, 2-row, 6-row. The interesting thing to me in one of the books that I read, and let's see if I can remember the name. It was, I'll look it up here in a second. But basically, they talked specifically about 2-row versus 6-row. And again, a lot of people have this sense that 2-row is better or superior. But actually at the time, these two people who wrote this brewing handbook. It's called the Handy Book of American Malting and Brewing and Associated something. I'll put the link in the description. They had a whole section about how 6-row was actually superior for brewing, specifically because it has higher diastatic power. That's still true. And that made it particularly well suited to high adjunct beers. So think about it, if you're using, 20 to 30% flaked corn, not a lot of fermentables going on with the corn. So you want higher diastatic power from your other malts to balance that out. So, and they also said that it was better for malting because of this kernel size and how the malting process works, and that the proteins in the 6-row actually precipitate better, so you end up with a clearer beer. I thought that was pretty interesting. I went with 100% 6-row. I did a protein rest because I did read that even, today's malts are not anything like would have been in the, mid 19th century. But I did read that it can help clarify the beer if you do protein rest. So I did a 20-minute protein rest at 122 or something like that. And, whether that helped the end beer or not, I don't know specifically. But it was, kind of a nice additional step to do in this batch. Bear with me. I just want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. I guess I'll talk briefly about the BJCP style. This pre-Prohibition Lager style was first introduced in the BJCP in 1998. At that point, it was in the American Light Lager category, and then it moved in 1999 to be called a Classic American Pilsner, or CAP, if you see that abbreviation. And then in 2015, it moved to where it is today. I think the latest version of the style guidelines are for 2021. And it has a style name of Pre-Prohibition Lager now, and it's in the historical beer category 27A. So in the style guidelines, I just kind of wanted to read this to give a sense of what they think the character of the beer should be based on, again, what these beers probably were like before Prohibition. In the overall impressions section, it reads, a bitter and hoppy pale American adjunct lager. Thought it was interesting, the adjunct words in there, often with a robust, corny flavor profile, although more crisp and neutral tasting versions exist. And for the flavor section, they say it should be, I won't read this whole thing to you, but basically medium to medium high maltiness, optional corn-like roundness, a little bit of sweetness, substantial hop bitterness, stands up to the malt, and lingers to the dry, soft to crisp finish. Medium to high rustic, floral, herbal, or spicy hop flavor. Medium to high bitterness that is not coarse and no harsh aftertaste. That's kind of like what you're shooting for if you're going to try to do the style, at least according to the BJCP. And to give you some specs about it, it should be between 25 and 40 IBU, SRM of 3 to 6, original gravity of 1044 to 1060, final gravity of 1010 to 1015, and an ABV of 4.5 to 6%. I think mine came in at 5.8 because I was shooting for more like 5, but I ended up getting 75% efficiency. I think probably in part because, well, two reasons. One is the protein rest. I think that helped. I do think that helped. And then I ended up mashing at 158 because I didn't want it to finish too dry. And I'll talk about the stats of the final beer when we do the tasting at the end. And then with the 75% efficiency, I was expecting 70, so it wound up a little bit high, but still to style by about 0.2% ABV. Commercial examples of this, you may find these around Coors Batch 19, Little Harpeth Chicken Scratch, Shell's Deer Brand, and the one that sounds interesting to me that I want to try sometime when I get my hands on it is Live Oak Brewing has a pre-war pills that sounds like they really dug into it, and I think theirs is like 30% corn or something like that. So grains, I talked a little bit about 2-row versus 6-row. I think the only other thing I'll say about that is when I'd never used 6-row before I made this, so when I got the grains, I kind of tasted just raw grains, 2-row versus 6-row. And the 6-row has an interesting flavor. It's rougher, but not bad. It's kind of rougher and grainier and not as sweet and kind of smooth tasting as the 2-row. And even as I was just tasting, I'm like, I can see how that would work well with some corn in the mix. So it's pretty interesting grain to try. If you haven't tried it, I would absolutely encourage you to make this style or something else with some 6-row in it. I think on my list, probably maybe my next beer, actually, I'm going to do a Kentucky Common. I don't know why I'm on this historical beer kick, but I am. And I'm going to use 6-row for that as well, which I think will work well. For hops, I used what would have been the predominant hop at the time, which was American cluster hops. And then both because I thought it would be interesting and also because I don't think it's out of style or out of historical context to use some German hops. I use some Hallertau Mittelfrüh at the end of the boil, give it a little bit of that German noble hop character because, of course, German brewers were the brewers in the mid-19th century. And then for yeast, I use Cellar Science German, which from what I understand is the Weihenstephan strain. It's either the same or very similar to Softlager 3470. Somebody may be more familiar with that and have used it. But again, I fermented cold. And then to give it a little bit of help, I added Fermaid O at the beginning of the fermentation and after 30%, or after it was about 30% into the fermentation. I was paranoid about, since I'd never done this before, fermenting that cold and wanted to give it a little bit of a boost. And there's more in the blog post about why Fermaid O versus some of the other yeast nutrients. I think I covered most of this. Diacetyl rest ramped up for 4 days and did a diacetyl rest for 4 days at 58. And then ramped down over 2 days. I was going to do that over a much longer period, but after talking to the brew tubers, they're like, just crash it. My freezer gets so cold so fast that I do, even when I'm not doing this type of beer, I tend to do it over a couple of days so stuff doesn't freeze up. I've even had the seal on the top of the fermenter last time. I think it contracted a little bit and it was leaking CO2 a little bit, which not a big deal, but just something to be aware of if you experience that. And then once the beer was transferred to the keg, I pressurized the keg, but I left it not carbonating for another week because I read somewhere that with lagers in particular, they can be more susceptible to getting carbonic bite if you carbonate too hard too fast. So I just kind of left it pressurized and let it sit for a week and then started carbonating. And as I said, it's been in the keg for 4 weeks now. And big question was all this waiting and all this finicky stuff with the process worth it? Even from a fun standpoint, I had a great time brewing this beer and spent way too much time doing research on it and reading up on this style. So yeah, I think it was totally worth it, but the proof is in the tasting. So I guess we'll see that at the end.
For the grain bill on this pre-prohibition lager, I went with 73% 6-row, 22% flaked corn, and 5% carapils. If you use that much flaked corn in a recipe, be aware it's pretty gummy, so it took me quite a while to get mashed in. Water profile, I tweaked the American lager profile in Brewfather just a little bit, and I am using Fermaid O, some at the beginning of the fermentation and some partway through. Give the yeast a little bit more help. Hops-wise, I went with about 29 IBU of cluster at 60 minutes. And at the end, give it a little bit of something extra, about 2.5 IBU, pretty hefty dose of Hallertau Mittelfrüh. Give it that spicy floral thing going on. Add a little bit of dimension there. Fermentation, going to use Cellar Science German, and we're going to ferment at 50 degrees, do a diacetyl rest, the traditional lager stuff, which took quite a long time. I've never done this before. And then in terms of the mash schedule, I did do a protein rest at 122 for 20 minutes, sacrification rest at 158 for 60 minutes, and then a mash out at 170 for about 10 minutes. Supposedly that protein rest, even though most people would ask, it's not really necessary these days, can help clarify the beer, and I found it really loosened the flaked corn up pretty nicely before we started doing the actual mash and recirculation.
Protein rest is done. It cleared up a little bit. It's still pretty kind of milky from the corn, but the grains are not nearly as clumpy as they were ahead of time. Kind of like with the stout, I think it helped, loosen stuff up a little bit. There's some debate, even with 6-row, this stuff is so highly modified that it probably isn't necessary to really do a protein rest, but, I've also read stuff that said it can help clear the beer better, so just giving it one last stir as it comes up to our mash temp of 158, which is pretty high, but for this type of beer, you don't want it to finish too dry. So we will see how this goes. Coming along pretty nicely though. About to do the mash out here, but I wanted to take one last look or get one last shot of just how much this has changed clarity-wise since we started. Pretty major. I did end up mashing for, 15 or 20 minutes longer. Some recipes I looked at for pre-prohibition lagers said 90-minute mash. I was going to do 60, but it took Temperature stabilization was a little bit of an issue or I was impatient, which is not unusual. So mashed a little bit longer just to compensate for a little bit of low temperature at the beginning of when I started timing anyway. I think that should take care of it. So I think we're gonna leave it at 158 for about 5 more minutes, and then we'll start bringing it up to 170 for about 10 minutes. Switching my phone because things got a little bit chaotic at the end, just with a lot of new equipment, Firmzilla, etc. But you can see the groundwater is cold enough that I'm getting the work down to a good pitching temp for lager yeast, because I'm going to ferment at 50. I may let that go a little bit colder even, so we don't shock the yeast too much. But yeah, good time to brew a lager. Also got pretty late, so it's kind of dark in here. But here we have the work going into the Firmzilla. First use of the Firmzilla, but I'm excited. So far so good. Just some stuff to figure out, and I kind of thought, oh, I'll figure it out while we're brewing the beer, and wasn't as smooth as I thought, because I had too much stuff going on. But overall, it's looking good. Wow, that is really foaming up nicely. Should be plenty of oxygen for the yeast to work with. And there is the Firmzilla in all its glory in the fermentation chamber. And Robarts are controlling this batch, so we will hope that they do right by me. I don't know what else to say other than Firmzilla seems cool. Pill is in there and reporting. I got 75% efficiency today instead of 65 that I have been getting, which is kind of annoying because now it's going to be not the beer I expected, but it'll probably be good. And then I did put that top cap on there because during fermentation, when the gravity hits about 1/3 of the way through fermenting, I'm going to add some more Fermaid O just to make sure that this all goes well. But yeah, love the Firmzilla. It's very cool. It was pretty easy for the first time to get it put together. Spunding valve's open at the moment, and I will close it later in the process. And I do want to show you the cool thing going on with the temperature controller. Just one second. All right, and you can see the temperature controller says Pre-Prohibition Lager. That's my profile I'm running. That's going to do the, sorry, it's a little bit jiggly. I don't know why. But that's going to do the ramping up for diacetyl rest, ramping down for cold crash, all based on the actual gravity. That gravity, I hope, settles out. I think there's some yeast and stuff on the pill at the moment, because that's about 10 points higher than my refractometer said, and I just calibrated it, so I don't know. We'll see if it settles out. If it doesn't, I may have to go to manual mode. But anyway, I thought that was pretty cool that it's going to be tracking all that stuff. Yeah, so you can see at the bottom of it says next at 1.035 specific gravity, it's going to alert me so that I know that I need to put in the Fermaid O. I will have to keep an eye on the gravity because I don't think that's quite right. And like I said, I calibrated it right before this. I did not do a 2-point calibration, so maybe that's my bad. Or maybe it'll settle out after it's been in there for a minute and chills out, but we'll see. Still, cool tech. Fermentation on the Pre-Prohibition Lager is about 30% done. I think I mentioned this at some point, but I don't know how I'm going to cut this video together yet. But I did add 4 grams of Fermaid O at the start of fermentation. I threw it in the bottom of the fermenter before I pitched the yeast, Fermaid O. And basically the idea here is it's got nitrogen and some other yeast nutrients that probably will be pretty beneficial to this lager beer that we're brewing. And the schedule of Fermaid O is basically add a little bit, 4 grams at the beginning, and then you add another 4 to 4.5 grams when the fermentation is about 30% done. A little bit late on that since I was out of town for a day, but it still is within parameters, I think, for doing this. So we're just going to add 4 grams to this sanitized Pyrex, 4.5. be, not the rest of this pack, I think it's a 12 gram pack. A little too much. It's more like 5. Well, we will just shake a little bit out in the sink here. So you don't want to do too much, because I think idea is if you have too much in there for the yeast to deal with, then you can end up having some off flavors if it doesn't consume it all. Okay, so now we're down to 3.7. This I should have been a lot more careful adding it, but that's okay. We'll clean it up here. Wasting a little bit of this stuff, though. Okay, so there's 4.5, and there's so little left. I'll probably just we'll just throw it over here. Okay, and then how I'm going to add this in the fermenter is basically I got one of these contraptions. Hopefully you can see it. I'll try to see what I'm showing you. Let's scoop that out of the way. I got one of these contraptions from Brew Hardware. I think I'll put a link up. Basically, this is a ball lock injector, so I got this all sanitized too, and I won't bother hooking it all up yet. This goes on the end, and then since the Firmzilla pressure lid has a third ball lock on the top, where you also attach the hot bong, I just put a ball lock on there for now. Basically, I can mix this stuff up with some distilled water, suck it up into this thing. It does have this little tip that comes with it as well, that you use to draw the liquid up in to the thing, and then basically I just slap the ball lock on the top and squirt it in there. I'm still debating how to minimize the oxygen since fermentation's active, and I'm doing it into the ball lock and the closed thing. If there's a little bit of air in here, I'm not super worried about it, but I will try to like purge it all out, basically get it like this, and then just draw in only what you need. And that should, be as good as I can get it without getting too crazy. So I'm going to mix the Fermaid O with some distilled water, and we'll get it injected. And there we have the Firmzilla happily fermenting away, and I got this thing full of my Fermaid O. And like I said, the nice thing is with that extra ball lock on the top, so I can have spunding valve. I still have the floating dip tube and the liquid line that we'll need eventually to get the beer back out of the fermenter. But with that third port on top, I can just stick this on there. Hopefully this is coming through. And since the spunding valve is still open, and we're still, fermenting, so it's, relatively safe, and everything's sanitized. And I will try not to squirt air in there, but then we'll just inject this stuff in there. Well, I'm sure we got a little bit of air, but that's not the end of the world, I don't think. It still, I think, probably beats opening the fermenter, especially this thing. It's not like you can pop that lid super quick and drop stuff in there. But that way, we'll give the yeast a little bit of help after it's 30% done with fermentation. And the next step with this will be when it hits about 80%, 75 to 80% done in terms of the gravity, then we will start ramping up to 58 slowly for the diacetyl rest. And I think I have a program to do that over about 4 days. So I guess until then, we're just going to let it do its thing.
We have reached the end of the diacetyl rest. I ramped it up to 58 degrees over 4 or 5 days, I think it was, and then gave it about the same amount of time to rest at 58 degrees. And now we're about to cold crash. So I have set the SodaStream canister there to about 10 psi, set the spunding valve to about 10 psi. That way I can have some pressure on it while the temperature starts to drop so the Firmzilla doesn't collapse. Very slick system. This is just quite a step up from the I love my Fermonster still, but this is quite a step up from the Fermonster, and you don't have to worry about like, oh, do I have a little bit too much pressure on there, because this is rated to a much higher pressure, obviously. So that's the plan. I'm going to ramp down using my automation stuff on the wrapped temperature controller and the pill. ramp down to 34 degrees, I think, across about 6 days, or over about 6 days, and then cold crash for about the same amount of time. I really want to give this thing a nice cold crash. But you can see this is, I didn't take a lot of video while it's fermenting, but that's a pretty market improvement from where, well, I shouldn't say improvement. It's starting to clear up already. The Kreuzen's gone. You can see even through the side there, it's relatively clear even now. You can see the floating dip tube in there. So I'm pretty happy with how this has been going. The proof will, of course, be in the drinking. But yeah, it's cold trash time, and we'll keep an eye on it.
The time has finally come to transfer. You can see me in this shot, I think, maybe, to transfer or to keg the Pre-Prohibition Lager. I did put some gelatin in the keg. Other than that, this should be pretty straightforward. This will be my first transfer out of the Fermzilla, so hopefully it'll go okay. Just doing my usual method of, you can't really see this. It was hard to get everything in here and have any sense of detail. I thought seeing the beer was more important than seeing a keg that's just sitting there on the intake side of it. But yeah, basically it's looking pretty good. There's, the usual stuff floating around, but I think it'll probably clear up. I did put a floating dip tube, a Float It 2.0 in the keg also. So hopefully that will help. So I think I got everything. I'm just going to double check that we're good. Yeah, all right, here goes nothing. Never done this on the Fermzilla before. And we'll try to start nice and slow in case anything weird's happening. Okay, beer is flowing. And I hear bubbles in the blow-off. Nice, and I'm just gonna go pretty slow. It's at about 5 PSI. No reason to rush it. Wow, that is looking really clear coming through the line for sure. And I did have, towards the end of this ferment, had 10 PSI of pressure, built up in the Fermzilla. I decided not to really use that and just kind of go with that with the soda stream, so you can kind of control it better. I don't know if you can see the soda stream, but it's the usual way. Yeah, you can. It's the usual way I do stuff. And that bubbling you're hearing is just a blow-off tube I have in a bucket of sanitizer down there. So that is looking good. I think I will just speed it up from here, and we'll see, get a gravity reading at the end. The pill tells me what the gravity is, but I always double check with the refractometer because you never know. Kind of curious how this was going to behave at the end there, and it is really going to get the vast majority of the liquid out of there, which is awesome. The thing is kind of lodged against well, actually it's just kind of it's just leaning against the pill. I don't think it's going to prevent it from doing anything. I may tip it a little bit this way just to make sure and make the pressure go way up for some reason. Let's let that off a little bit. Actually, I don't think I'm going to need to. Okay, we're going to let the rest go here. Okay, we are kegged. I will move the camera and get a better shot of the inside of the Fermzilla just so you can kind of see what's left. It's pretty nice. I probably left more than I needed to, but actually it'll probably be too annoying if you don't get Blair Witch syndrome or whatever. Drop this down, get in close and angle it in. Yeah, that's not gonna work. I'll just pop it off of here. Apologies for this. Run and gun cameras work. Okay, so you can see down in there, hopefully that reflection's not too bad. It got most of the beer out of there, I think. This thing probably didn't even have an image stabilization or whatever. Now my shirt's reflecting. Anyway, it did a nice job. There's a little bit of a puddle back down in there. It probably is 8 ounces or so if I had to guess. So all in all, very pleased. While I have the camera off, might as well get a wide shot of what was going on that you couldn't see. Keg, blow-off tube into a bucket of sanitizer that I purged out. And yeah, that was great. Love the Fermzilla. Fingers crossed for the beer. We will, I think next up will be a tasting, finally. And here, in all its glory, is the end result. I am really pleased with this beer. It is very clear. I hope that comes out in the on the camera there. I'm trying to go off to the side here so my shirt's not getting in the way. Very clear, nice, very light golden color. Yeah, I hope you can see there's bubbles rising up from the bottom. So anyway, just a great looking beer. In terms of the aroma, it's malty, and I don't know that I can really, sense that there's corn in here. If I didn't know, I don't know that I would guess that there's corn in there, but it's malty and kind of rich. And I think the addition of the Hallertau Mittelfrüh hops at the end there really help with the aroma from a hop standpoint. The cluster hops and Hallertau Mittelfrüh are actually pretty similar. They're both kind of earthy, spicy. Cluster, if I remember correctly, can have a little bit of fruitiness to it. Whereas the Hallertau probably not so much. But anyway, they seem to me like they would complement each other well. This was the first pour off the keg when it was still the line was still a bit warm when I came out here. So I poured once, got some foam off there, and did it again. But the head retention is pretty good. I don't know if you can see the lacing around the top of the glass as it's dying down, but that's working pretty well. Also, nice white, fluffy, small bubbles in the head. And yeah, the aroma, I mean, it's not intense. It's not an IPA, but it just has a really nice, earthy, malty aroma. Maybe just a little hint of some floral stuff going on in it as well. Okay, let's give it a taste. I've had this before, but I'll try to describe it. Yeah, that is a really fabulous beer. It's nice and malty. The corn, I think you don't really taste it so much as corn, but it adds a nice, rich kind of middle in the mouthfeel. It's got, I'd call it medium to medium full body. And the hops are, I think, well balanced. It is bitter. This is not kind of modern day lager. It's bitter. It's not IPA bitter, but the hops are very present. And not a lot of it's a pretty clean finish. I think I think I pick up a little bit of the flake corn in the finish, and then it's nice and crisp at the end, and it does that thing where you kind of want to how it finishes nice and dry. You want to go in for another sip. But yeah, I don't know if I could be happier with how this turned out. I don't really have any. Trying to think if I could pick one thing that I would change. I might want it to finish a little bit less dry. Let me see if I can pull that up. Bear with me, because it's just a little bit. It's nice and crisp, and I love that about it. But I think it could just be a little bit fuller in the finish Not saying it should be sweet, but I think it may just be, and again, this is me being super nitpicky because I really love the way this came out. But yeah, I think it could finish just maybe a little bit fuller, if that makes sense. But let me see where this wound up because I cannot recall off the top of my head. So I apologize for me staring at my phone here, looking at Brewfather. So this finished, the original gravity on the actual batch was 1056. I was going for 1050 or 1049 or something like that, I believe, initially. And it finished at 1012. So it's within the style parameters. If I could bump that up just a little bit, maybe 1015, something like that, I think that would probably help a tad. But yeah, I just really love how that came out. It's an easy drinking, smooth beer. It's much fuller than lagers you'd get, today, normal mainstream macro lagers. It's great to look at. Yeah, I love that hop aroma. It's just nice and spicy and earthy, and in the flavor as well. Like I said, it's pretty assertive. I wouldn't say it's, again, not an IPA. I wouldn't call it aggressive, but assertive is a good way to put it. And that is just, yeah, really. There's also just a little bit, I don't know where this would be coming from, there's not a lot of yeast character. I didn't talk about that. That yeast finished pretty clean. There's no sulfur going on like you can have in some lagers. It just smells and tastes nice and clean. And there's just a little bit of citrus that might be coming from the cluster hops. I think those can have a little bit of, yeah, it's kind of vague. So if I had to put my finger on a type of citrus, I'd call it lemon, but it's not, super lemony. But yeah, that is a really good beer. It's nice. It's easy drinking. It's different than anything that I've ever had. It's yeah, I really enjoyed looking into kind of the history of it all and making this beer. If you're at all interested, if this sounds like a cool thing to try, I highly encourage you to try it. You can look around and see if there's different recipes. They all tend to just be 6-row and flaked corn. I did add a little bit of carapils in here as well, just because I can't not. I probably could have left it out. And I can't remember if I mentioned this. I did fine it with gelatin just to get a little bit of additional clarity. But even going into the keg, you probably saw in the video, it was pretty clear already. Might have been overkill to add the gelatin, but yeah, it was fun to make. End result is absolutely fantastic. That keg is probably going to go pretty quickly. Had some friends over, they loved it. One person who tried it said, "I don't know why you're not drinking this all day, every day." Yeah, so I'm really happy with it, and it was a blast to look into all this stuff. So I think I'll stop there so I stop rambling. But yeah, try this out. I think the next video I have coming up is Red Ale. And I'll probably and then that'll probably come out next, and I'm going to do a video of canning. Ended up getting a Blickman beer gun, and I have the wrapped can filler that I've been fighting with a little bit, but we'll talk about that in another video. Until then, make yourself a Pre-Prohibition Lager. Really fantastic beer. And I'm going to go finish this. Cheers.